My journey into public service began when I joined the Army 3 days after high school graduation. I joined the Army as an ammunition specialist, and I was one of 4 women surrounded by 200 men. And I learned very early on what it meant to not have any power, to not have any voice, and to essentially be invisible. I was a woman, I was a person of color, and I was enlisted in working in an institution that was not designed for people like me. And my experiences in the Army, while I'm very open about the life lessons and leadership lessons I learned, I'm also very transparent about how deeply it changed me. And the experiences that I went through completely changed the trajectory for not just my career, but for my entire life. I knew the pain of being marginalized, and because of that, I committed myself to a new mission when I returned from Iraq, to commit myself, to commit my life, to commit my career to expanding spaces, to creating spaces, to empower the marginalized, the forgotten, the disenfranchised of our society. And my mission has taken me from the grassroots to Capitol Hill. When I left the service, I enrolled as a full-time college student and began my journey as a group facilitator for a direct service nonprofit. And while I was in that position, it brought me a lot of joy and contentment, but it also challenged me to think about this idea of impact. What does it mean to have an impact on society? And I thought about this question, and it led me to becoming a grassroots community organizer, where I organized communities, local neighborhoods, against policies and programs that government was making that was harmful to those communities that I was organizing in. And thinking about this idea of impact as an organizer, I came to realize that no matter how many marches I organized, or no matter how many people I turned out and mobilized to show up to a press conference, if I didn't have access to the decision makers, then my idea of impact in that particular role would be limited. And so I moved on to join the institution that I had been previously organizing against, and that was government. I joined local government in Georgia as a grants manager. And in this role, I thought that I would have the opportunity to decide where we would be able to financially invest on behalf of government in the communities that I knew had been forgotten. And I learned very quickly about the politics of the budget, that the community-based organizations that I knew from having been working on the ground to be effective were not necessarily the community-based organizations that received government funding, that the nonprofit organizations that received government funding were not because they were the most effective, but because they were the nonprofit organizations that had the best political connections. And it was a really hard lesson for me to learn and to process that there is a severe consequence when there is a misalignment, rather, between government investment and community needs, and the impact that has on communities everywhere. And frustrated, I worked a series of electoral campaigns for a few years, working at the city, state, and federal level, because I wanted to commit myself to be in a space, to be part of a process where I could help elect good people to public office, so that they could be in the position to make those right decisions when it came to using government as a tool to invest in communities that had been forgotten. At the time, I was working on my graduate program degree, and I was wrapping up my program. And when I graduated with my public policy degree, I did what any self-respecting policy wonk would do, is I moved to Washington, D.C. to work on Capitol Hill. And when I arrived in DC, I learned very quickly again that Capitol Hill isn't about policy, it's all about politics. And that was an important lesson for me to learn as someone who was trying to use her skill sets and use her passion to use policy as a tool to build our communities after they've been destroyed and continue to be destroyed by government decisions. And I also learned, working on Capitol Hill, that I really missed being on the ground, really being part of a local community where I knew and understood very deeply and intimately what it meant to be part of a community. After 2 years, I packed my bags and I moved to New York City, where I became executive director of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus, where I managed 26 council members who have 26 very different priorities and personalities. And I learned that there is a skill of walking a tightrope of balancing competing priorities and finding that space and growing that space of a shared consensus. And one of my proudest accomplishments working for the caucus was essentially getting 26 council members to agree on a budget and to agree on a legislative agenda that would empower Black and brown communities all across the 5 boroughs. Currently, in my new position, I am working in a national capacity to fight voter suppression and to support state legislators and work with grassroots organizations across all 50 states to advance progressive democracy reforms. And all of my positions, I have learned really important lessons about organizing, about people power. And while they have all been very different from one another, they have all been connected by my commitment to creating spaces to empower the communities that have always been disenfranchised and forgotten. And I am now finally in a position where I can use my talents and my skills and my passion to continue to do what I've always done, but just doing it in a different way. A highlight of my career was when I was selected by Hillary Rodham Clinton to place her name into presidential nomination at the 2016 Democratic National Convention. That was by far the most public accolade that I have earned throughout my career. But without question, by far, what brings me the most joy and what I am most proud of is working with young Black and brown women who are interested in entering politics and teaching them how do you enter politics with a purpose. We limit our understanding of politics. Currently, most people think of politics as our 2 political parties and going to the voting booth on election day. Yes, they are both of those things, but also politics is so much more. I look at my own journey and think about how I have changed, my own understanding of what it meant to live and lead a political life. When I started off as a community organizer, being political, understanding political power, to me, in that time in my life and in that particular role, it meant that I was able to knock on the doors of complete strangers who were being impacted by public policies and programs in a negative way, and introducing them to becoming involved participants in direct actions and protest, and bringing them out to marches and sharing their stories at a press conference to help influence public policy by the elected officials who would make that decision on these people's lives by making a yay or nay vote. When I worked on Capitol Hill, my understanding of political power evolved and it changed because of where I was, because of my role. Political power working on the Hill was about building coalitions across the aisles to make sure that we secured enough votes so that bills that were being introduced in committee that would do really good things for the people that needed it most would not die in committee. When I worked for the caucus at the New York City Council, working with 26 council members who had very, very different interests, political power looked like, to me, getting them to agree on something. And so it became an act of relationship building and consensus and negotiation, and really understanding and building that skill of how do I take 26 very different agendas that are personally driven by different districts. And how do I weave together an agenda that everyone can agree with that will have an amazing impact that's citywide in America's largest city? And so when I think about this phrase, going beyond politics, everything is politics. And so for me, I'm really excited about the opportunity to share with folks and the next generation that, particularly living in our skin as Black women, as brown women, as women in American society, every breath that we take is a political act, and to begin to challenge ourselves and hold ourselves accountable to lead political lives. We give up our power so easily. And we do it because we don't recognize that we have it in the first place. As someone who has worked within government and has organized against it, I am very open and honest about how government has intentionally created harm to the communities that I work with. Low-income Black and brown communities have been disenfranchised systematically by government decisions, by government practices, by the very design of government. And so the greatest challenge is, how do we not just rebuild trust with government, but how do we challenge ourselves to understand the power that we have? Because I deeply believe that government as an institution is rooted in the power of the people. But if we as a people don't recognize the power that we hold, then we have a system that only works for the few and not for all of us. And so the greatest challenge in my line of work is to challenge the traditional understanding of what power is, and to invite people to understand that power is them. One of the most important career lessons I've learned has been to not attach ourselves to any person, place, organization, or project. Commit ourselves to our mission, our calling, our purpose only. And that is how I have been able to keep my power and my peace. I would say that you are enough. I took way too long in my own journey to really understand and embrace this lesson, but I have finally learned it. And my wish for you, as young Black and brown women in college, embark on your own journeys, my wish for you is that you learn this lesson and you learn it fully. I have spent so much of my career and my life checking boxes in search of validation to prove that I belonged in the spaces that I was. And it took a lot for me to have to really just come to a point in my life, after everything that I've accomplished, after everything that I've done, to come to a place where I recognize my own worth, regardless of what society thinks or what society tells me. And that has come from a place of deep pain in my journey, of constantly having to show up feeling unworthy and constantly feeling the need to prove myself as worthy. I would just tell myself, and I'm telling all of you, that you are enough and that I see you in a world that tries to erase you.